Admiral Jack Morrison stood on the bridge of the massive ship floating in the cold darkness near Mars. The ship had no real name yet, just a code word that the engineers used when they talked about it in whispers. They called it Project Defiance. Morrison liked that name because it said everything about what humans were doing right now. They were being defiant against an enemy that wanted to wipe them out completely. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of computers and the gentle whoosh of air recycling systems. Morrison looked out through the main viewing window at the red planet below. Mars had been humanity's first real colony outside Earth. Now it might be one of the last places humans would ever live. The thought made his jaw clench tight. Communications Officer Danny Brooks sat at his station, his young face pale with worry. He had been monitoring the emergency channels for 3 days straight, listening to the desperate calls from human colonies across the galaxy. One by one, those voices were going silent as the Zephyrian Empire moved closer to Earth. "Sir," Brooks said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm getting reports from the Luna defense stations. The Zephyrian fleet just broke through our outer perimeter." Morrison nodded slowly. He had expected this news, but hearing it still felt like a punch to the gut. Luna was humanity's last line of defense before Earth itself. The moonbase had the most powerful weapons humans had ever built, and it had fallen in less than 6 hours. "How many ships did we lose?" Morrison asked. Brooks checked his instruments. "All of them, sir. The entire Luna defense fleet. That's 27 ships, including the battlecruiser Washington." Morrison closed his eyes for a moment. The Washington had been humanity's most powerful warship until Project Defiance came along. Captain Rodriguez and her crew of 800 people were all dead now. Good people who had died buying Earth a few more hours. Chief Engineer Lisa Hamilton climbed up from the lower levels of the ship. Her coveralls were dirty with grease and her gray hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked like she had not slept in days, which was probably true. Hamilton had been working around the clock to get their systems ready for what everyone knew was coming. "Admiral," Hamilton said, wiping her hands on a dirty rag, "I need to give you an update on our status. The good news is that the main reactor is stable, and we have full power to all systems. The bad news is that almost everything else is still experimental." Morrison turned to face her. Hamilton had been building starships for 30 years. If anyone could make Project Defiance work, it was her. But even she looked worried about what they were trying to do. "Tell me about the weapons," Morrison said. Hamilton sighed. "The gravitic cannons are installed and the targeting computers are running simulations. But we have never actually fired them at a real target. The theory says they should work, but theory and reality are two different things. The gravitic cannons were humanity's secret weapon. Instead of firing energy beams or missiles like normal ship weapons, they created powerful gravity fields that could crush enemy ships from the inside. The idea had come from studying captured alien technology, but humans had improved on the original design in ways that even surprised the engineers." "What about the drive system?" Morrison asked. "The quantum displacement drive is online," Hamilton said. "We can make short jumps anywhere within the solar system. But every jump puts stress on the engine cores. I cannot promise how many times we can use it before something breaks." Morrison understood the problem. Project Defiance was built using a mix of human engineering and alien technology that nobody fully understood. They had taken pieces from crashed Zephyrian ships, combined them with human innovations, and somehow created something that worked. But working and working reliably were not the same thing. Tactical Officer Ben Parker looked up from his station. Parker was young but smart, and he had spent months studying everything humans knew about Zephyrian battle tactics. "Sir, I'm tracking the enemy fleet on long-range sensors. 200 ships, all of them bigger than anything we have except for this one." Morrison walked over to look at Parker's display. The Zephyrian fleet showed up as red dots moving steadily toward Earth. Each dot represented a warship that could destroy a human city with a single shot. Together, they had enough firepower to turn Earth into a lifeless rock. "How long until they reach Earth?" Morrison asked. Parker did some quick calculations. 18 hours, sir. Maybe 20 if they stop to regroup at Jupiter." Morrison nodded. That gave them less than a day to figure out how to save their entire species. The pressure should have been overwhelming, but Morrison felt strangely calm. This was what he had trained for his entire career. This was why Project Defiance existed. "Sir," Brooks called out from his station, "I'm getting a transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Stevens wants to speak with you." Morrison walked back to the center of the bridge. Put him through. The main screen flickered and showed the face of Admiral Stevens, the commanding officer of Earth's remaining defense forces. Stevens looked old and tired. The past few months of fighting had aged him 10 years. Jack, Stevens said, I'm not going to lie to you. We're out of options down here. The Zephyrians have destroyed every fleet we sent against them. Your ship is humanity's last hope. Morrison felt the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders. Everyone on Earth, everyone in the colonies, everyone who called themselves human was counting on Project Defiance and her crew of 200 people. We're ready, sir, Morrison said, even though he was not sure if that was true. Stevens smiled sadly. I know you are. Good hunting, Admiral. Earth is counting on you. The transmission ended and the bridge fell silent again. Morrison looked around at his crew. They were young and old, experienced veterans and fresh recruits. What they all had in common was that they had volunteered for this mission, knowing they probably would not survive it. All right, people, Morrison said. You heard the man. We're humanity's last hope. Let's make sure we're a good one. Hamilton, how long until we can engage the enemy? Give me 6 more hours to run final systems checks, Hamilton said. I want to make sure everything works before we go into battle. Morrison nodded. 6 hours to prepare for a fight that would decide the fate of humanity. It was not much time, but it would have to be enough. Humans had always been good at making the most of impossible situations. Outside the ship, space was dark and cold and filled with enemies. But inside Project Defiance, the lights were bright and the air was warm, and 200 humans were getting ready to show the galaxy what their species was made of. Dr. Peter Chen wiped the sweat from his forehead as he crawled out from inside the quantum displacement drive housing. The massive machine hummed with barely controlled energy, its crystal matrix glowing bright blue in the dim light of the engineering bay. Chen had been working on this drive for 3 years, ever since the first Zephyrian attack showed humanity that their old ships were no match for alien technology. The drive was supposed to let Project Defiance jump instantly from one location to another without using the normal hyperspace routes that other ships needed. It was completely different from anything humans had built before. Most of the technology came from studying wreckage of alien ships, but Chen and his team had made improvements that even the original builders never thought of. Dr. Chen, called out technician Amy Rodriguez from her control station. The resonance cascade is still showing fluctuations in the third harmonic. If we push the power above 60%, the containment field might collapse. Chen nodded and walked over to look at her readings. Rodriguez was one of the best technicians he had ever worked with, but even she looked worried about what they were trying to do. The quantum drive had never been tested at full power because nobody wanted to risk destroying the ship during peacetime. Now they might need to use it at maximum capacity just to survive. What happens if the containment field fails? Rodriguez asked. Chen looked at the massive drive core behind them. The quantum field would expand uncontrolled. It would probably tear a hole in spacetime big enough to swallow this entire ship and maybe half of Mars too. Rodriguez went pale. So we keep it under 60%. We keep it at 59% and pray that's enough, Chen said. He had spent too many sleepless nights running calculations to feel optimistic about their chances. The drive would work, but working and working safely were two very different things. 3 levels down from the quantum drive, Gunnery Sergeant Kyle Jackson was having his own problems with experimental technology. The gravitic cannons were supposed to be humanity's answer to Zephyrian shields and armor. Instead of trying to punch through enemy defenses with energy or missiles, the cannons would create gravity fields strong enough to crush ships from the inside out. Jackson stood in front of the main cannon control panel, staring at readings that made no sense to him. He was a soldier, not a scientist. He knew how to fire every weapon humans had ever built, but these gravitic cannons were something completely new. Sergeant, said Private First Class Maria Santos from the targeting station, the computers keep crashing when I try to calculate firing solutions. The gravitational math is too complex for our systems. Jackson rubbed his temples. The targeting computers were the most advanced systems humans had ever built, but they were not designed to handle the kind of calculations needed for gravity weapons. Every time Santos tried to lock onto a target, the computers would overload and shut down. What if we don't use computers at all? Santos suggested. My grandfather served on old naval ships before space travel. He told me stories about manual targeting with slide rules and firing charts. Jackson stared at her for a long moment. Santos was barely 20 years old, but she might have just solved their biggest problem. You want to aim gravity weapons manually like we're firing cannons on an old sailing ship? Why not? Santos said. Gravity follows the same physics laws whether we calculate it with computers or with math on paper. If we can plot the trajectory manually, we can hit the target. Jackson grinned. It was crazy enough to work. Get me some paper charts and a slide rule. We're going old school. While Santos worked on manual firing solutions, Jackson tested the cannons themselves. The weapons were built into the hull of Project Defiance, hidden behind armor plates that would slide away when they needed to fire. Each cannon was the size of a small building and drew power directly from the ship's main reactor. Jackson activated the first cannon and watched the power readings spike. The gravity field generator came online with a low humming sound that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. According to the theory, the cannon would create a localized gravity well strong enough to crush a Zephyrian battleship. According to reality, nobody knew for sure what would happen. Cannon 1 is online and stable, Jackson reported over the ship's communication system. Cannon 2 is showing some power fluctuations but should be ready when we need it. Up on the bridge, Admiral Morrison was coordinating with the rest of humanity's surviving fleet. It was not much of a fleet anymore. Most of Earth's military ships had been destroyed in the early battles with the Zephyrians. What remained were converted civilian vessels, old patrol ships, and a few military craft that had been too damaged to fight effectively. Tactical Officer Ben Parker was trying to make sense of the scattered reports from human ships throughout the solar system. Sir, the merchant vessel New Boston is requesting permission to join our attack formation. Captain Kelly says she's armed her cargo hauler with mining charges and wants to ram the Zephyrian flagship if she gets the chance. Morrison felt a surge of pride in his species. Captain Kelly was a civilian cargo pilot who had never been in a military battle, but she was willing to sacrifice her ship and her life for a chance to hurt the enemy. That kind of courage was what made humans dangerous even when they were outgunned and outnumbered. Tell Captain Kelly that ramming attacks are authorized only as a last resort, Morrison said. We're going to need every ship we have for this fight. Parker continued reading reports from the scattered human fleet. The passenger liner Golden Gate has been converted into a missile platform. The mining ship Iron Mountain is armed with industrial lasers. The patrol vessel Thunder Bay survived the Luna battle and still has most of her weapons. Morrison nodded. It was not much against 200 Zephyrian warships, but it was what they had. Humans had always been good at making the most of desperate situations. Communications Officer Danny Brooks looked up from his station. Sir, I'm receiving a priority transmission from the outer system. It's Captain Williams on the scout ship Eagle Eye. Put him through, Morrison said. Captain Williams appeared on the main screen. His face was grim, and his uniform was torn from recent battle damage. Admiral, I've been shadowing the Zephyrian fleet for the past 6 hours. They're moving in standard attack formation, but there's something you need to know. They're not just planning to destroy our ships. They have troop transports with them. They're planning to invade Earth. Morrison felt his blood run cold. A space battle was one thing, but an invasion meant the Zephyrians wanted to capture Earth intact. That meant they had plans for the planet after they eliminated humanity. How long until they reach Earth? Morrison asked. 14 hours, Williams replied. They're moving slower than expected, probably to keep their formation tight. Morrison cut the transmission and turned to his crew. The timeline had changed, but their mission remained the same. They had to stop the Zephyrian fleet before it reached Earth, and they had to do it with experimental weapons and untested technology. All stations, prepare for combat operations, Morrison announced over the ship's communication system. This is what we trained for. Let's show these aliens what humans can do when we're fighting for our home. The Zephyrian fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their silver ships gleaming against the darkness of space like deadly jewels. Admiral Crickstall stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the human resistance through the main viewing screen. His 4 eyes blinked slowly as he counted the pathetic collection of vessels that dared to oppose the might of the Zephyrian Empire. Tactical report, Crickstall ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 17 star systems. His tactical officer, a younger Zephyrian with nervous movements, checked his instruments. 44 human vessels detected, Admiral. Most appear to be converted civilian craft with minimal armament. However, There is one large ship of unknown configuration that does not match any vessel in our databases. Krixtal's mandibles clicked together in what passed for amusement among his species. The humans had built themselves a new toy, but it would not matter. The Zephyrian Empire had been conquering primitive species for 3 centuries. Humans were just another young race that had grown too bold for their own good. "Begin the attack," Krixtal commanded. "Target their homeworld first. Let them watch their planet burn before we finish them." The Zephyrian fleet began to advance in their standard battle formation. 200 warships moved forward like a silver tide, their weapons charging and their shields at maximum power. Each ship was larger and more heavily armed than anything humanity had ever built before Project Defiance came along. But as the alien fleet moved toward Earth, the massive human vessel began to move as well. Project Defiance was nearly twice the size of Krixtal's flagship, but it moved with impossible grace for something so large. The ship turned and accelerated toward the Zephyrian formation with the confidence of a predator stalking its prey. On the bridge of Project Defiance, Admiral Morrison watched the enemy fleet approach on his tactical display. 200 ships against 44. The odds were impossible, but humans had never been good at accepting impossible odds. "Dr. Chen, status on the quantum drive," Morrison said. Chen's voice came over the communication system from the engineering section. "Drive is stable and ready for jump operations, Admiral. The containment field is holding steady at 58% power. Sergeant Jackson, weapon status." Jackson's reply came from the gunnery section. "Gravitic cannons are online and ready to fire. Santos has calculated manual firing solutions for the first wave of targets. We're as ready as we'll ever be." Morrison nodded and looked around his bridge. His crew was nervous but determined. They all knew they were about to test experimental weapons against proven alien technology. They all knew most of them would probably die in the next few hours. But none of them showed any sign of backing down. "Navigator Walsh, plot a jump to position Alpha 7, Morrison ordered. "Put us directly above their formation." Navigator Steve Walsh's fingers moved quickly over his controls. "Jump plotted and ready, sir. We'll appear 2,000 kilometers above their lead ships." Morrison took a deep breath. This was the moment when they would find out if Project Defiance was humanity's salvation, or just an expensive way to die. "Execute jump." The quantum displacement drive engaged with a sound like reality tearing apart. Space twisted around Project Defiance as the ship disappeared from its position and reappeared instantaneously above the Zephyrian fleet. The sudden appearance of such a massive vessel directly overhead caught the alien formation completely by surprise. "All weapons, open fire," Morrison commanded. The gravitic cannon spoke with a deep rumbling sound that seemed to come from the fabric of space itself. Invisible fields of twisted gravity reached out from Project Defiance and touched the lead Zephyrian cruiser. The alien ship's shields flared briefly, then collapsed as the gravity field overwhelmed them. The cruiser's hull began to buckle and fold as localized gravity crushed it like an invisible giant's fist. The Zephyrian ship simply crumpled. Its elegant lines collapsed into a twisted ball of metal as the gravity field compressed it beyond all structural limits. Secondary explosions rippled through the wreckage as fuel tanks and weapon systems were crushed together. "Direct hit on Target 1, Santos reported from the gunnery section. "Target destroyed." A second Zephyrian vessel tried to evade the gravity fields, but the invisible weapons followed it relentlessly. The ship's engines flared as it attempted to escape, but gravity moved at the speed of light and could not be outrun. The destroyer was caught in the field and torn apart as differential gravity forces pulled it in different directions. "Target 2 destroyed," Santos called out. "Reloading gravitic cannon 3 for next shot." On the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Krixtal watched in horror as his advanced warships were destroyed by weapons he did not understand. His tactical officer was frantically scanning the human vessel, trying to determine what kind of technology could penetrate Zephyrian shields so easily. "Report," Krixtal demanded. "What kind of weapons are they using?" The tactical officer's voice shook with confusion. "Unknown technology, Admiral. The weapons appear to be manipulating gravitational fields. Our shields are designed to deflect energy and physical projectiles, but they cannot stop gravity itself." Krixtal felt something he had not experienced in decades of warfare: fear. The humans had developed something completely outside Zephyrian experience. something that made their most advanced defenses useless. All ships, concentrate fire on the large human vessel, Krikstal ordered. Destroy it before it can attack again. But Project Defiance was already moving. The quantum displacement drive engaged again, and the massive ship vanished from the center of the Zephyrian formation, reappearing 3,000 kilometers away. The alien weapons fire that had been aimed at the human ship struck empty space instead. Morrison smiled grimly as he watched the Zephyrian response. They're not used to fighting an enemy that can appear and disappear at will. Walsh, plot another jump. Put us on their flank this time. Jump plotted, sir, Walsh replied. Ready on your command. Execute jump. Jackson, I want continuous fire on their command ships. Project Defiance disappeared again and reappeared beside the Zephyrian formation. The gravitic cannons fired repeatedly, each shot destroying another alien vessel. The Zephyrians tried to adjust their formation to protect their flagship, but the human ship kept jumping to new positions faster than they could respond. The rest of the human fleet, inspired by Project Defiance's success, pressed forward with renewed courage. The converted civilian ships might not have gravity weapons, but they had something just as dangerous. They had crews who were fighting for their homes and families. Captain Kelly of the merchant vessel New Boston found herself facing a Zephyrian destroyer that had broken away from the main formation. Her cargo hauler was no match for the alien warship in a straight fight, but Kelly had no intention of fighting fair. This is for everyone we've lost, Kelly whispered as she armed the mining charges she had loaded into her cargo bay. She drove her ship straight toward the Zephyrian destroyer, ignoring the enemy weapons fire that tore holes in her hull. The New Boston struck the alien ship amidships and both vessels exploded in a brilliant fireball. The explosion created a gap in the Zephyrian defensive line that 3 human patrol ships exploited ruthlessly. Driving deep into the enemy formation with their weapons blazing, Morrison watched the battle unfold on his tactical display. The odds were still terrible, but they were no longer impossible. The Zephyrians had superior numbers and technology, but they had underestimated human determination and ingenuity. Sir, Communications Officer Brooks called out. The Zephyrian flagship is attempting to contact us. Morrison nodded. Put them through. Let's hear what they have to say. Admiral Krikstal's alien face appeared on the main screen. His 4 eyes burned with anger and something that might have been respect. Human Commander, your vessel is impressive, but this battle is far from over. Surrender now and I will ensure your species is relocated to a suitable world. Morrison stepped forward, his weathered face hard as stone. Admiral, I have a counteroffer. Leave our space immediately and I might let some of your ships survive to tell your empire what happens when you threaten humanity. Krikstal's mandibles spread wide in an expression of rage. Your arrogance will be your destruction, human. The transmission ended and Morrison turned back to his crew. The real battle was just beginning. The battle had turned into a deadly dance among the stars. Project Defiance would appear without warning, unleash devastating fire from its gravitic cannons, then vanish before the Zephyrians could respond effectively. Each jump brought the massive human ship to a new position where it could strike at the alien formation from an unexpected angle. Admiral Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the tactical display as red dots representing enemy ships disappeared one by one. They had destroyed nearly 50 Zephyrian vessels, but the cost was beginning to show. Warning lights flashed across multiple control panels and damage reports came in from all sections of the ship. Engineering to bridge, came Dr. Chen's voice over the communication system. His words were interrupted by the sound of sparking electrical systems. Admiral, the quantum drive is showing serious stress fractures in the containment matrix. We can't keep making these jumps indefinitely. Morrison grimaced. The quantum displacement drive was their greatest advantage, but it was also experimental technology pushed far beyond its design limits. How many more jumps can you give me? Maybe 10, Chen replied. Maybe 5. The containment field is fluctuating and I'm seeing microfractures in the crystal matrix. One bad jump and we could end up scattered across 3 star systems. From the gunnery section, Sergeant Jackson's report was equally grim. Gravitic cannon array is overheating badly. The power conduits weren't designed for continuous firing. I can give you maybe 6 more shots before we risk a cascade failure that could take out half the ship. Morrison studied the tactical display. They had reduced the Zephyrian fleet by a quarter, but at a terrible cost to their own forces. Only 19 human ships remained operational, and most of those were damaged. The converted civilian vessels had fought with incredible courage, but courage alone could not overcome the technological superiority of alien warships. Captain Lisa Morgan of the converted freighter Spirit of Detroit had been one of the most aggressive human commanders in the battle. Her cargo hauler had been armed with nothing more dangerous than mining charges and industrial cutting lasers, but she had used them to cripple 2 Zephyrian destroyers before her luck ran out. "This is Spirit of Detroit to all human vessels." Morgan's voice came over the emergency channel. Her ship was burning and venting atmosphere, but her voice was steady. "My engines are gone and life support is failing. I'm going to ram the nearest enemy ship. It's been an honor serving with you all." Morrison watched helplessly as the Spirit of Detroit made her final run. The damaged freighter accelerated toward a Zephyrian cruiser, her hull glowing red-hot from enemy weapons fire. The 2 ships collided in a brilliant explosion that lit up the darkness of space. Both vessels were destroyed instantly, but the explosion created a gap in the Zephyrian defensive line. "Sir," Tactical Officer Parker called out, "3 of our patrol ships are exploiting the breach Captain Morgan created. They're driving deep into the enemy formation." Morrison nodded grimly. Every human loss hurt, but their sacrifices were not in vain. The Zephyrian formation was beginning to show signs of disorder as their commanders struggled to deal with human tactics they had never encountered before. The alien fleet had been designed to fight conventional space battles against enemies who followed established rules of warfare. The Zephyrians expected their opponents to maintain formation, fight at long range, and retreat when the odds became unfavorable. They were not prepared for humans who appeared from nowhere, fought at point-blank range, and seemed willing to die rather than surrender. Admiral Krickstall was beginning to understand that he had underestimated humanity in the worst possible way. His tactical officer reported another 10 ships lost to the mysterious human weapons, and his fleet was starting to lose cohesion as individual captains tried to avoid the deadly gravity fields. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "Captain Vextar is requesting permission to withdraw his squadron. He reports severe damage and his shields are failing." Krickstall's mandibles clicked together in frustration. Captain Vextar was one of his most experienced commanders, but even he was being overwhelmed by human ferocity. "Denied. All ships will maintain formation and continue the attack." But maintaining formation was becoming impossible. Project Defiance appeared again, this time directly in front of Krickstall's flagship. The massive human vessel hung in space like a metal mountain, its hull scarred from battle damage but its weapons still functional. "All batteries, concentrate fire on that ship," Krickstall ordered. "Destroy it now." 20 Zephyrian warships opened fire simultaneously, their energy weapons creating a web of deadly light between them and Project Defiance. The human ship's shields flared and sparked under the massive assault, but they held long enough for the quantum drive to engage. Project Defiance vanished just as the shields failed, leaving the Zephyrian weapons to fire harmlessly into empty space. On the bridge of Project Defiance, damage control teams were working frantically to repair critical systems. Sparks flew from overloaded control panels and the smell of burning electronics filled the air. Chief Petty Officer Tom Bradley coordinated the repair efforts while dodging falling debris from damaged ceiling panels. "Port shield generator is completely burned out," Bradley reported to Morrison. "We're taking direct hits to the hull armor. I've got teams working on it, but we need at least an hour to make proper repairs." Morrison knew they did not have an hour. The battle was reaching its climax and every minute counted. "Do what you can, Chief. We just need to hold together a little longer." Navigator Walsh looked up from his damaged control station. "Sir, I'm having trouble plotting accurate jumps. The navigation computer took damage in that last attack, and the quantum field calculations are becoming unreliable." Morrison felt the weight of command pressing down on him. His ship was falling apart. His crew was exhausted, and the enemy still outnumbered them 3-1. But they had come too far to give up now. "Sir," Communications Officer Brooks called out urgently, "I'm receiving a priority message from Earth Defense Command. They're reporting Zephyrian scout ships have been detected in Earth's outer atmosphere. Some of their fleet broke off from the main battle." Morrison's blood ran cold. While they had been fighting the main Zephyrian fleet, enemy ships had slipped past them and reached Earth. The planet's remaining defenses would not last long against even a small alien force. "How many ships?" Morrison asked. Brooks checked his instruments. "At least 20, possibly more. They're moving toward the major population centers. Morrison made the hardest decision of his military career. Earth needed help, but abandoning this battle would allow the main Zephyrian fleet to reach the planet with overwhelming force. They had to finish this fight here and now, even if it meant sacrificing themselves. All remaining human ships, this is Admiral Morrison, he announced over the fleet communication channel. I'm ordering a general withdrawal to minimum safe distance. Project Defiance will continue to engage the enemy. Sir, Parker questioned, that would leave us alone against over 100 Zephyrian vessels. Morrison nodded. That's an order, Lieutenant. One by one, the surviving human ships pulled back from the battle zone. Damaged patrol boats, converted freighters, and the few remaining military vessels withdrew to safety, leaving Project Defiance alone against the reformed Zephyrian fleet. Admiral Crixatal watched the human ships retreat and felt a surge of satisfaction. The humans are finally showing sense. All ships concentrate fire on their remaining vessel. We end this now. But Morrison had one final card to play, something he had hoped would not be necessary. Dr. Chen, what happens if we deliberately overload the quantum displacement drive? Chen's voice came back immediately, filled with alarm. Admiral, you're talking about a massive space-time distortion. The energy release could destroy everything within several million kilometers, including us. Especially us, sir. Morrison looked around his bridge at the crew that had followed him into this impossible battle. They had come so far with experimental weapons and determination, but now only one option remained. I won't order anyone to stay for this, Morrison said quietly. Escape pods are ready if anyone wants to take their chances. Not one person on the bridge moved toward the escape pods. They had come this far together and they would finish it together. The final phase of the battle was about to begin, and Admiral Morrison knew that everything depended on the next few minutes. Project Defiance hung alone in space, surrounded by more than 100 Zephyrian warships that were closing in for the kill. The massive human vessel looked small against the alien fleet, but Morrison had learned that size was not always the most important factor in warfare. Dr. Chen, begin the overload sequence, Morrison ordered. His voice was calm despite the enormity of what he was asking his chief engineer to do. In the engineering section, Chen stared at the quantum displacement drive controls with shaking hands. He had spent 3 years building this machine, and now he was being asked to destroy it in a way that would probably kill everyone aboard the ship. But he also understood that this was humanity's last chance to stop the Zephyrian invasion. Initiating quantum field destabilization, Chen announced over the ship's communication system. All personnel should brace for massive gravitational distortions. The quantum drive began to sing with deadly harmonics as Chen slowly increased the power beyond all safety limits. The crystal matrix that controlled the space-time field started glowing brighter and brighter, casting eerie blue light throughout the engineering bay. Warning alarms sounded throughout the ship as every system registered the dangerous energy buildup. Admiral Crixtal watched Project Defiance from his flagship and noticed the strange glow emanating from the human vessel. His science officer was frantically scanning the ship, trying to understand what the humans were attempting. Admiral, the science officer reported with growing alarm, the human ship is generating massive quantum field fluctuations. The energy readings are off our instruments. I've never seen anything like this. Crixtal felt a chill of fear run through him. The humans had already demonstrated weapons technology that his empire did not understand. What new horror were they preparing now? All ships concentrate fire on that vessel, Crixtal ordered desperately. Destroy it before it can complete whatever it's doing. Every remaining Zephyrian warship opened fire simultaneously. Hundreds of energy beams lanced through space toward Project Defiance, creating a web of deadly light that would have vaporized any normal vessel. But the quantum field distortion around the human ship was bending space-time itself, causing many of the alien weapons to miss their target entirely. The shots that did connect struck Project Defiance with devastating force. Huge sections of hull armor were blown away, and entire decks were exposed to the vacuum of space. But the ship's crew kept working at their stations even as the vessel shook apart around them. Hull breach on decks 7 through 12, reported Damage Control Officer Bradley. Emergency force fields are holding, but we're losing structural integrity throughout the ship. On the bridge, sparks flew from overloaded control panels and the main viewing screen flickered with static. Navigator Walsh was thrown from his chair as another salvo of enemy fire struck the ship, But he climbed back to his station and continued monitoring the quantum field buildup. Field destabilization at 40% and climbing, Walsh reported. Space-time distortion is beginning to affect local gravity. Morrison could feel the effect Walsh was describing. His body felt heavier one moment and lighter the next as the quantum field played havoc with the fundamental forces of physics. Around Project Defiance, space itself was becoming unstable. The first Zephyrian ships to feel the effect were those closest to the human vessel. A destroyer that had moved in for a close-range attack found its hull beginning to stretch and compress as differential gravity fields pulled it in different directions. The alien captain tried to retreat, but his engines could not overcome the gravitational distortions. Field destabilization at 60%, Chen reported from engineering. His voice was strained as he fought to control forces that were beyond human understanding. The containment matrix is beginning to fracture. I don't know how much longer I can hold this together. More Zephyrian ships were being caught in the expanding field of twisted space-time. A heavy cruiser that had been firing on Project Defiance suddenly found itself compressed into a sphere. As localized gravity crushed it like an invisible fist, another vessel simply ceased to exist as it was caught in a region where the laws of physics no longer applied consistently. Admiral Kriegstall watched, in horror as his fleet was destroyed by forces he could not comprehend. Ships that had conquered star systems were being torn apart by weapons that attacked the very fabric of reality. This was beyond anything the Zephyrian Empire had ever encountered. "Retreat," Kriegstall ordered desperately. All ships withdraw to maximum range immediately, but it was too late for many of his vessels. The quantum distortion field was expanding faster than most ships could escape. One by one, the pride of the Zephyrian fleet was crushed, stretched, or simply dissolved as spacetime became fluid around them. Field destabilization at 80%, Chen announced. "I'm losing control of the containment matrix. The field is going to collapse in approximately 60 seconds. Morrison knew that when the field collapsed, it would release enough energy to destroy everything within millions of kilometers. Project Defiance would be vaporized instantly, along with any remaining Zephyrian ships. But Morrison had accepted that price when he ordered the overload sequence. "All hands, this has been an honor," Morrison announced over the ship's communication system. "We've shown the galaxy what humanity is capable of. Whatever happens next, remember that we didn't back down." But Dr. Chen had been working on one final surprise, something he had built into the quantum drive without telling anyone. As the containment field reached critical instability, automatic safety systems that Chen had designed activated without warning. Instead of allowing the field to collapse uncontrolled, the safety systems channeled all the built-up energy into a single directed beam that lanced out from Project Defiance like the finger of an angry god. The beam struck the remaining Zephyrian ships with the concentrated power of a collapsing star, vaporizing them instantly. Admiral Kriegstall had just enough time to see the beam approaching his flagship before his ship and everything aboard it was reduced to elementary particles. The proud commander who had conquered 17 star systems died without understanding what had killed him. When the energy finally dissipated, Project Defiance hung motionless in space. The ship's hull was scarred and blackened, many of its systems were dead, and structural damage was visible throughout the vessel. But it was intact, and more importantly, it was alive. Morrison keyed the ship-wide communication system with a hand that shook from exhaustion and relief. "All stations, this is the Admiral. Mission accomplished. The Zephyrian fleet has been destroyed. We're going home." Cheers echoed through the damaged corridors of Project Defiance as the crew realized they had not only survived, but actually won an impossible victory. They had faced an enemy that outnumbered them 5-1 and possessed superior technology. But human determination and ingenuity had found a way to triumph. In the days and weeks that followed, word of the battle spread throughout the galaxy. The Zephyrian Empire, faced with the complete loss of their most powerful fleet, agreed to a permanent ceasefire with humanity. Other alien species that had dismissed humans as primitive began to reconsider their positions. The small Zephyrian force that had reached Earth was quickly defeated by the planet's remaining defenses once the main fleet was destroyed. Without reinforcements, the invasion force surrendered rather than face the same fate as their fleet. Project Defiance was formally commissioned as the USS Indomitable and became the flagship of humanity's new deep space fleet. But those who had served aboard her during that desperate battle would always remember her by another name. She was the most dangerous warship ever built, not because of her size or her weapons, but because she carried something that no alien empire had ever faced before. She carried the unbreakable spirit of a species that refused to surrender when surrender would have been the sensible choice. The battle had proven that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the universe was not technology or superior numbers. Sometimes it was simply the grit and resolve of people who would not give up, no matter how impossible the odds became. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through conquest or intimidation, but by showing the galaxy that some things were worth fighting for, even when victory seemed impossible, and that lesson would echo through the cosmos for generations to come.